Was that the microphone down there?
No, it's your hand goes flat. Hello. I'm Tom.
Hi, Tom.
I'm Marcus.
Hi, Marcus.
We are artists.
Tom and Marcus. You wrote that. So, SDPHP for Wednesday, October 12th. We do not have a speaker. We would love a speaker. This will probably be the last one for the year. I don't think we'll have a November, December one because of all the vacation days, but we are looking for somebody to speak. So if you can, let us know.
Business.com was the North County host for that meetup, and we just wanted to say thanks to them. They're actually, we can tell the story if you wanted to.
Yep, Business.com, as many of you know, was purchased a while ago by Perch, and they've moved to an all-remote system, so we are no longer in North County with Business.com, but a huge thanks to Business.com and Robert Zweischer for all of the work that they've done for us. It's been fantastic.
If you're interested in taking that up and finding a new location, talk to this guy.
Yeah, or this guy, or Eric or John. But right now there is no North County meetup. We'd love to see it get started up again, but right now we don't have a host or location for it.
What is it? Next month we're going to be here. We also don't have a presentation for that one either. As you know, the Laravel groups do about 30-minute presentations. We do 2 of them. So if you have 30 minutes of stuff you can talk about, please present. That'd be great.
Or if you don't, you can always try.
Yeah. You don't have to be an expert.
No.
That's a big thing.
I'm not. This is our Trello board. If you're looking for an idea on a presentation to give, or want to just upvote something and say this is a presentation I want to hear about, you can let us know through here. And all of these slides will be available at intro.sclog.com, so you don't have to write anything down at this point. You can get in contact with us through our meetup page, meetup.sclog.com, our Slack page, sdphp.slack.com, which you can sign up for at this URL, or on IRC, which is my preferred means of communication, but Eric's not here for me to make fun of about that, so.
All right, some Laravel news since our last meetup. A few things happened. Lumen got tagged with 5.3, which I don't know. I think they just pulled in the core components. I don't know if anything really big happened there.
Yeah, it's pretty low level.
Yeah. Spark 2 got updated, or Spark got updated to version 2, which is pulling in 5.3. A new version of Laravel got released, which kind of added a lot of features around testing, so you could, in your tests, call, hey, if you're expecting an event or jobs, mail or notifications, which is really nice. And some Forge updates came out, just like in the past few days. Now you can update your remote URL or your remote URLs for your repository. So if you went from Bitbucket to GitHub or vice versa, you can update that. You can manage your MySQL databases and users. And this was a question mark. Taylor posted that he was looking at bringing in Passport support to Spark. He was going to look at pulling that in today. I don't know if he actually
And you wrote that today?
Yeah, I wrote that yesterday, maybe today.
It's now 5/3/11 because Laravel.
I thought I did it yesterday. Yeah.
And I don't know about the survey.
There's also a survey that went out from Laravel News that they're just kind of gathering information about the users of Laravel. I think they did one last year as well, just kind of give out the metrics about who we are.
Our resources, these are the same resources as always. The Laravel podcast, Laravel News podcast, and Laravel Snippets. The Laravel News blog, Laracast blog, and Laravel Daily, and all the Twitter handles that you should be following that probably aren't. Tips and tricks, this one's yours. I'll give you this.
This is mine?
Well, you did it. You did 13 or 14.
All I did was that. I expected you to go over. So yeah, we're going through tips and tricks. Code Rabbi did a talk last year at some point.
2 years now.
Only on 14?
Yeah.
Okay. Going through a bunch of tips and tricks through one presentation. So we're slowly starting to go through them. Here's number 14 that he had. So this is appending mutated properties. This is, I don't know if I have a point on this. Oh, there it is. So this little appends section here, you can add that array to a model and set your get full name attribute. So I don't know if you've seen that. You've probably seen that before, where you could set your accessors, and if you add my first name, last name, this actually isn't a column here. Right? First name, last name are your columns. If you do that and set your appends, when you dump out that model to array or JSON, anything like that, you'll actually get that full name section added as well, property added as well. So that's kind of nice. And number 15 is if you wanted to filter or find only models that had child rows. Thank you. That's right there. Sorry, I'm already looking ahead. So you could do something like this function here, which the most important part is that right there, which has products. So you could say, give me all the categories with the products that actually have products. So this won't return categories that have no products. So that's a little tip and trick as well. And this is back to you.
That's us. That's me and Eric and John. Sometimes. We're still looking for reviews and comments and everything. We have an actual website up now, phpugly.com. And I think our last episode we just talked about the Merlin's Magic Sleep Sack. Yeah.
Do they make them in adult sizes?
If you have a baby with mild colic. Also, we talk about PHP.
Sometimes.
Huge thanks to Carry.net for having us here. They've had us here for a while now. And to the Diego Dev group for the alcohol pregame components and for getting everyone here together. My shirt would say Diego Dev except for mustard.
All right,
so on with the presentation.
Yep.
Evan.
Talk about Elasticsearch.
We'll see if we can. How long can we stretch it out for?
Well, it'll depend on how fast I talk. We were supposed to have 2 presentations, but unfortunately, it looks like it's just me now. So, well, actually, I take it back. Tom does have something he's been holding in his pocket. Just occurred to me that I think that it's not up. That needs to be running. probably because, because you're running over here. Okay. First, you have to wipe the operating system, and then you install Unix. So, for anybody who was not at the San Diego PHP users group 2 weeks ago, this is actually a continuation of a talk that I was giving then. I'm going to go over a couple of things that I talked about briefly, so it's not like you're totally out of luck. But this is about using Elasticsearch in Laravel, and this is about a project we are currently working on where we have to take a lot of news articles. We have to do some filtering with them. So, biggest question is, offhand, is why Elasticsearch? Why don't we just do this in SQL or something? And it's because Elasticsearch is a full text search engine, which means you can make a routine that lets you do things like find the articles about rock and roll. You'll get the articles about rock and roll. You shouldn't get articles about rocks, rolls, rolling rock beer, or people rolling rocks up hills. And yeah, you can program your own routines in SQL to do that, but you're going to create huge headaches for yourself. More specifically now, why are we using, or why would you want to use Elasticsearch instead of something such as Algolia? And Algolia is not bad. It does a lot of things. I'm far from an expert in it, so there may be other reasons that I'm not aware of, but the reasons you might want to use it is because, primarily for me, it's open source, which means if there are aspects of it that aren't doing what I want, I can go in and fix them. I can make them do what I want. It also means it runs on Windows, Macs, and Linux. That's not a huge issue for you if you're using Algolia, since that's just a web engine where it's running out in the cloud. Oh, it also runs on Raspberry Pis. It's distributed, which means that if the stuff you're doing with Elasticsearch is getting bogged down, you can just set up another machine. Whereas in Algolia, if it's getting bogged down, I assume you have to spend more money, a lot more money. There's nothing you can do if it starts getting bogged down in Algolia. That's even worse. So, why am I going in using Elasticsearch the way that I'm going to be using it and not using Scout? Eric was saying, hey, maybe Evan will talk about Scout, using Elasticsearch through Scout, things like that. And I did a little looking at it, and no, I am probably not going to talk about, well, I'm certainly not going to really talk about Scout, and that's because, first off, the documentation is very, very light right now. So it's possible I don't have everything correct, but the main thing is flexibility. Looks like running through Scout, I'm great if I wanted to search an article for the words rock and roll. But I'm not going to be great if I want to do much beyond that. And with Elasticsearch, you can do a lot more than that. Through Scout, you're limited to a single index. It was, until recently, named Laravel. You couldn't even change that name. Turns out that about a week or two ago, they changed it so that now you can make it named something else in your config file. But it's still one index, whatever name was in the config file. That you don't have a lot of flexibility there. For what we're doing, a bigger, huge problem is that you can't create filters, and you can't say that you want to do a search using a specific filter. I'm going to go on and tell you what those are. We talked about them a little bit, or more than a little bit, at the PHP group, but I'll touch on them again, and why you might want to do that. And here's sort of a just real quick example. I say that you can't create filters, you also can't create analyzers. You can't really see this. I'll show you a better view later on. But here I'm defining a custom analyzer, and I'm saying I want it to do these things. You can't do that with Scout. As near as I can tell, you're locked in. You can say, I want to search for these words. Thank you. There's a lot more to working with these things than just that. I'm also going to use a tool called Kibana, and Kibana also uses Sense. Aha, that's why that happened. Yep. So here's an example of Sense running right now. It's a tool that lets you talk to Elasticsearch. What you have to understand is that, like Algolia, Elasticsearch is a separate process. It doesn't even have to be on the same machine, which is why it can be distributed. You make HTTP calls to the Elasticsearch engine, and it gives you a result back. So Kibana is a way to do it without having to be in a program. Lets you test things out, check outputs, see things like that. Lets you also do some examination of the database, which you may need to do from time to time. And then Sense is just a component of Kibana. There's different modules you can load, like Graph. But for right now, thank you very much. I don't want Elasticsearch. Did this before. Now for 1 second. I don't know why it's defaulting to that. So I'm actually running Elasticsearch under a Vagrant setup, and I'm doing that because I like the flexibility that I get from working with Vagrant. That way I can make changes and I don't have to worry about screwing up my box. I can work on different projects using different things, and they won't get in each other's way. There we go. Yes, and you're back to ignition. Okay. So, I talked about this before, real briefly. Setting up Elasticsearch is not terribly difficult. It's a set of, right now, 6 commands that you have to run, and most of these are downloading the latest copy of Elasticsearch. Because I'm running on a Unix-based system, I'm using apt-get. Setup is obviously going to be different on Windows or a Mac. Thomas did this a couple of months back and had some minor issues because he was using an older version of Ubuntu on VirtualBox. Yes, you even helped me through this. That's why I know these steps are by and large good. But because his machine was a little bit older, he had to use OpenJDK 7, and he couldn't use system control. He had to use, what was it? Yeah, had to use an it. Yeah. So I'm going to bring up a second Vagrant. Actually, I guess this is the third now that I've got running. This one does not have Elasticsearch installed. I'm just doing it to show. This failed horribly last time because I didn't have certain network access. Weren't sure why that happened, but I just took those commands and put them into a shell script so that I don't have to fumble them around. But here it's just updating. We'll go through. Elasticsearch is basically just a CRUD app, like anything else. You make a request to Elasticsearch, it gives you an answer back. Little bit different in that some of your requests can be things like add this to the index, where it gets stored into the index, but it does not remember anything from one request to the next. Every request is a whole new, hey, I just got something new and I'm going to work off of it. After it's done installing, it shouldn't take too long, we can run this command here at the very bottom, and that should let you know that it's up and running. And that's just a plain curl request. We're talking to the host on port 9200, which is the default port. And that's going to take another 30 seconds or so. I was originally going to not toss this in, but since my time got stretched out a little.
So Elasticsearch works as a read-heavy database engine. So most databases that we work with are actually write-heavy databases. MySQL is a write-heavy database where it performs heavy indexing as quick as possible, whereas Elasticsearch indexes the harder parts so that reading can be as fast as possible. So it front loads the CPU time into new records being written versus frequent writes, which is what we do with MySQL.
Right.
So that's one of the big differences between an engine like Elasticsearch and MySQL.
And that's often something you need to do. Incidentally, the reason I went through these steps is because most versions of Unix, or most Debians at least, already have Elasticsearch. But if you just do the straightforward apt-get install Elasticsearch, they'll give you 1.5, which Elasticsearch is currently running at about 2.4. And I don't know why they are limited to that, but crap. Seem to have lost my curl command, and of course I can't get it right now. So that right there tells you that Elasticsearch is up and running. And that is more or less the standard type of response you're going to see from Elasticsearch. It returns a JSON object. And here's the object with the various attributes and things. Elasticsearch is technically a Java app that's running on top of Lucene. So here it's telling us the version too. Elasticsearch is 2.4, Lucene is 5.2, and that's their tagline. I have no idea what it means, but they use it everywhere. Because I didn't give it a name, which I could configure in the YML file, it generated a default name, in this case Peregrine. And it called this cluster name Elasticsearch, which is really odd. I usually see much more random words in there. I don't know if that's new to 2.4.1 or what, but a cluster is a group of machines that are working together. So as a result, you'll just talk to one of them, and if you've got a whole bunch of stuff going on, it distributes the load out to them, and you should get your results back much faster. So the project we're working on, we've got two main things that we were trying to accomplish. They're both related, and that's that we have all of these news articles that are coming in through RSS feeds. And so the main thing that we were trying to do was make it so that we could very quickly do a search. This is for a financial group. We could quickly do a search and say, show me recent articles about Goldman Sachs. Again, yeah, you can do that with SQL, and in fact, that was kind of what we were first looking at doing. The problem is that we also wanted to detect duplicate articles, because we're going from multiple RSS feeds, and the different companies would frequently do things like get an Associated Press release. They change a little bit of stuff at the beginning, maybe a little bit of stuff at the end, and then they'd send it out. And so the client didn't want the customers saying, show me the latest articles on Goldman Sachs, and they get 4 copies of the basically same article from these different feeds because it's just been repeated. So we actually do something to figure out, hey, is this article that just came in possibly a duplicate of an article that we've already indexed? Trying to do that with SQL is a nightmare. So under the hood, the first thing I had to do was handle the fact that when you do a database migration, it doesn't have a good way to migrate Elasticsearch. That. Hang on 1 second. Databases, migrations. There we go. So we just added a migration in Laravel. I just said create an empty migration. I'm going to call it create Elasticsearch indexes. And we're using, there's an Elasticsearch set of tools, API for PHP. Standard, Composer, require Elasticsearch. So since that's in there, we use their tool called Client Builder. Go ahead and say, we're going to create a client. If this index already exists, go ahead and delete it. And then I set up a bunch of parameters for this. And this is why I would not recommend using Scout, at least right now. Because we had to do some pretty tricky stuff in order to detect duplicate articles. So we created a custom analyzer that we just called cleverly Dupe Analyzer. And it filters everything, it turns them lowercase, and it does something that's called a shingle. And what a shingle means is, I'm going to go through this article, and I'm going to take a group of words, and that is my token. Now, dupe shingle filters the name I gave it. I actually define it down here. And you can see right here, I want to keep using this in case anybody is watching through YouTube. I'm limiting the filter, the shingles, to 5. That's the minimum size and the maximum size. You can actually create all sorts of different sizes, but through playing around and testing a couple of things, 5 seem to work pretty well.
Is that characters, words,
It's words. So if I go back over here, and I look at Kibana, these are examples of tokens. No financial terms were disclosed. This is one of the great things about Elasticsearch, is that you can also do data aggregation, data analysis. So what I'm actually doing is I've gone through all 29,000 articles that have been indexed. It took 2 seconds. And the token, no financial terms were disclosed, occurs 2,814 times. So apparently they really like using that term. 10% of their articles have the term, no financial terms were disclosed.
So is this using like a simile table where like no fiscal terms is the same thing? Or nil fiscal or nil financial?
No, not exactly. That goes back to your analyzer and your filter.
That's what you need for shingles.
Well, no, shingle simply says 5 words, period. Okay? But it's 5 words out of the dupe text. So if you look here, you might see that this is not exactly what you would see written. There's 2 reasons for that. I do some pre-processing myself to remove certain words. And the reason I do that, they have a feature called stop words, but I didn't like using it because it leaves a little marker saying there's a blank word, blank space here. There was a word here, but I'm ignoring it. And for this purpose, I actually wanted them completely gone. If I hadn't done that, then when I look at these shingles, you might see no financial, lead round underscore, because the word of has been dropped. Participation, another underscore because there was another word there that got dropped. They still take up space in the shingles, and I didn't like that. So I actually manually went ahead and did some things to remove those, so the shingles come out a little cleaner. But when you are doing this, when you're doing stop words, when you're doing what's called stemming, because you'll notice that you may notice that there's some things that don't quite make sense because I'm looking for a good example. Maybe I didn't do all the stemming here. Let me look at my filter really quick. Oh, no. I only convert everything to lowercase and then did the shingle filter. Okay.
So you remove the $sign.
I did that manually. But you can also tell Elasticsearch to do that. The reason I did it manually is because if I had it removing things like $signs, it might leave markers in that I didn't want. So, I mean, it's not a perfect tool, like any other tool. Sometimes you have to go in and do some of the work yourself. But yes, you can tell it to do things like remove $signs and things like that. Stemming is something where it looks for what is basically the stem of the word. So for instance, we had, founded. If had stemming turned on, that would be found. And it would be found whether the analyzed text had been founded, founding, founder. I'm sure there's other ones in there. But it would turn all of those into found so that it helps you make matches. Similarly, you can do synonyms. So when you were asking about this right here, financial terms, fiscal, I could go in and I could say, here's a list of synonyms. If you say fiscal, change it to financial. I didn't do that in this case.
But what you're doing in that case is changing the original data and storing the altered version of the original data.
Sure.
As a searchable.
But that's fine, because all I'm doing in this case is having these so that I can find the article.
Right.
I then have in here an ID that goes into our database of articles and says, that's the article. So when I do this search and say, hey, this is the article you probably want, and then I give them the article, I look it up from this ID and I give them the original article. That also lets me do things like I get to filter out all image, HTML, image commands and things like that because I don't want them here. So the process of shingling goes through and it breaks words up into groups of whatever. It doesn't say first 5 words, next 5 words, next 5 words. It'll actually do words 1 through 5, 2 through 6 form another token, 3 through 7, 4 through 8. That is extremely useful in locating duplicates, and that's why we did that here. Could I have done that in SQL? Yeah. I would have hated it. Oh no, never say never.
I'll say
No. That's one thing I learned, is never tell a client, no, we can't do that. Instead, it's, yes, we can. And here's exactly how many hours it's going to take and how much money it's going to cost you. Or, we can go with this solution. Works much better than no. Because when you say no, they assume, no, there's got to be a way to do it. In fact, the answer is, yeah, there is a way. You don't want to do it, but if you tell them no, then they're going to try and prove you wrong. So here for the database migration, we go ahead and we enter all the parameters for this database. Say, I'm going to create a custom analyzer in here. My custom analyzer is using a custom filter.
So you're using a Laravel migration created on Elasticsearch.
Database. Yep. Well, that's the whole. That's why I'm talking about that here rather than the San Diego PHP, because here is how to use Elasticsearch in Laravel. It's a little more specific, so I didn't want to bring it up there because a lot of the people there aren't even using Laravel. They're doing plenty of PHP stuff, and if they're there and using Laravel, then they should come here 2 weeks later anyway. This is our specific what we're doing. So I go ahead and I'm creating the database and I'm creating my entries. I've got an entry called search. I've got an entry called dupe text, which you saw those, they look very similar. They're not actually identical. The date that the article is created at, the headline. Now in the headline, I use a different analyzer. And, oh no, I'm sorry. Search text is using English. I hadn't caught that. So if I go back and look at this once more, okay, no. I was thinking that the search text may have chopped some of this up differently, but it didn't. I am right, they appear to be almost completely identical. I store the headline separately, and there's a reason for that. Store the link. I don't actually know why I'm storing the link. The news source ID is the ID of the news object, and I'll go into that in a second. Publication date is the date the article was published. We get that from the RSS feed. Updated at is if we have to do anything to change the data in Elasticsearch, we'll get that to change. So I create all the parameters. Now I did this as a string. Oh wait, I take it back. I created it as a JSON object. It's not a string. And client indexes create. And then all those parameters I said. And that creates the basic index right there. So I use the migration to create and destroy the data, the index. So if we have to do a rollback, I've got something in there that removes it. That way it all stays completely within the Laravel method of handling things. You don't have to sit there and remember to go in later and create the index, delete the index, or anything. It goes right into the migration. So what I did here, I told you that we get this news item in through the RSS feed. How does it get into the Elasticsearch? And we do that because the news item is just a model, apps models, news items. And I expand on the index method and say, go ahead. This is, we're going to strip out all these words. I just do well, actually, first, turn everything lower, lowercase. I do a replacement to remove excess spaces. I leave only letters and numbers. And technically, because this is going from the inside out, I leave everything only letters and numbers. Then I remove excess spaces because things like apostrophe S, the apostrophe got deleted, the S is just dangling there. That sometimes winds up creating like 2 and 3 spaces, which was causing me some headaches. I wanted to get it down to a single space. After that, I go through and I filter through my stop words, which includes any single letter, and then just a bunch of common words that I wanted to remove. And, if. I believe I actually got these through using Elasticsearch, using the aggregation, doing single word shingles, going, wow, I've got this word occurring a whole bunch of times, and I am absolutely uninterested in that word. So I went through and removed the first 100 or so of these words that don't add anything to our search, such as com, because .com gets used all over the place in these articles. The dot gets turned into a space, com's hanging by itself, and nobody cares about that word. So I clean up and I remove those, and then I index it. And I just say, because I've got my news items object, it's got something that's called headline. I shove that into the headline of the index object I'm creating. Not for this. Now, I did do something with traits later on, and I was going to mention it, although it's not truly related to Elasticsearch. It's related to some of the stuff we did with the news, but it's not Elasticsearch specific. Okay, so I shoved the search text and the dupe text, or I'm sorry, the cleaned up text into both of those, the link, the news ID, all of that. I put in the date by converting it to Carbon object, and it got really cranky about some things, so I had to turn it to a very specific form. So I have to use Carbon RFC 3339 string. And that puts it into the database. So when a brand new news item is added, and I do that by going to the news source, and I read from the source, finds a bunch of articles, it goes through, and it starts indexing them. What? Alt 1. Oh, okay. Elasticsearch does have some limitations as to how big it can build certain things, like the number of shingles. So in a couple of these cases, I do some things where I say, wow, that's a lot of words, so I'm going to break it into multiple things, and then I can use that to build the shingles.
What kind of class is this? It's not element or model, is it?
It's under the model. It's under the news source.
Is it an element model?
No, it's a custom model.
Okay, so I'm trying to get at it, because this is just...
So the news source is the RSS feed.
Okay, what kind of, is it, what's this extended?
That's just extending model. I mean, it's not extending.
So it is an element model.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't understand what you were saying. I thought you meant, can I just call a news source model? It's extending a model. Okay.
So there is a news source table. You're just extending that table to have calls to Elastic.
Yes. Every item, every row in the news source is one source. My current copy of the code's a little old, so I've got 11 sources, of which actually I believe 2 of them are not working right now. Maybe 3.
There are SQL tables like that.
Yes. And the news item actually gets stored in the SQL table. So a new thing comes in, I read from the source, I do some games to determine, hey, is this brand new? Or rather, do I have a link for it? And if I don't have a link for it, does it seem to be a duplicate? If it's not a duplicate, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a news item. And a news source has many news items. Sorry?
What method are you on?
The create method?
No, the sources.
Oh, this is still read source. This is the news source reading from a source.
Okay.
So,
Still searching.
yes. So what happens is I come in here.
So are you building the Laravel first, and then you go out and you build like something in Elasticsearch and use them both together?
Yes, I believe technically the MySQL is created first, but no. They're actually, I'd have to look to know exactly table-wise how things are being created. Because what happens is I make a call to create a news item. Now, when you create a news item, that creates an op entry in the news item table, right? While it's doing that, it's also creating the Elasticsearch. It's using things like the news items text. I'm pretty sure that means that it's got to have already entered it into the SQL.
Is there an event listener that you're tying to?
No.
It must be tied to that listener. There must be a safe method.
Hang on. So it says it's been a little bit since I looked at this.
I mean, they're happening in parallel either way.
Yeah,
That's the key.
but it's done on the news item itself when it's creating a new index.
Creating means created before, created means creating after.
Yeah.
In the event column.
News item create, and then yeah, you're right. There's a listener.
There's got to be a listener.
I've forgotten where I put that
There's
listener.
either a listener on created or created.
It's yeah.
Basically, you have in your code, you're creating a record in MySQL using Eloquent.
Yes, there we go. News item saved. That was it. I was looking for that earlier today, going, I'm pretty sure I created that, but I couldn't remember where it was.
So the past tense indicates that the record is being written to the database first,
Yeah.
and then
And then that item that has just been written is used to generate the index.
You mean say
Yes.
the ID in the Elasticsearch so you know which news article?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Right here on the news source, not news source, I'm sorry, news item.
okay, if you're using the new IDs.
I just did the,
The news source ID.
no, news source ID.
Just IDs, just
Yeah.
this ID.
Oh, this ID. Okay, got it.
There we go.
Which is the same thing on the
Yeah. Because we know that's a unique ID. So, nice and clean. That creates our entry. Now, honestly, it becomes a little bit of a question of exactly how much stuff we need to store. Because we're basically running two databases now. So we've basically got pretty much this whole article stored in Elasticsearch as well as SQL.
I thought you always stored the search text. You always stored the.
Search text and dupes text.
Yeah, you're not search.
You're right. I'm not
The body.
I'm not currently storing the body, but I could if I had wanted to. That's about the only thing it's missing.
Yeah, but there's a reason.
The reason was the client didn't want to display the article, they wanted to always have the link and have the link
Yeah.
on the page.
Well-
Don't ask me why that was the requirement.
Not just that, but these multi-homed services like Elasticsearch, Algolia, you're sending data to them, which is just a string. They're sending data back to you, which is a billion times the string you send. Or just a string of matching IDs. Now,
Yeah.
there are highlight systems. I don't know if you're going to get into highlighting.
I was not planning on it because it's already 8. So I've already gone way longer than I thought I was going to, flying off into different parts of this.
So you can't send back the search text because the search text is the originally sent text times 1,000 results.
Well, I think he didn't mean search text, so I think he meant the original source text.
Yeah.
And I could have stored that if I wanted to. And actually on these news objects, we do store the source text because we have a function to return a blurb,
Yeah.
if you recall,
Yeah.
so that when they see a bunch of articles on the side, it doesn't show the full article, but it shows the first so many words or so.
And Algolia is the same way, where you store the search text, you store the original text, but you also store the search text and the new text and the new text and the new text and the new text. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what creating an index is writing the same thing a million different ways.
Yeah, we didn't really need to do that here simply because there's a lot of this data that we're not going to access. We do need to actually store the publication date. I'm not completely sure we need to store the news source ID because of what we're doing right now, but we could probably trim it down a little bit. But actually Elasticsearch is, we discovered through some tests, pretty good at its space management. I think we found out, didn't we find out that these 30,000 articles were taking something like 60 megabytes? What? Magic? No, because it's stored as tokens. Yeah. Yeah, the fact that it's stored as tokens. Meaning it really doesn't take up that much space. And so we wound up going, well, I guess we won't have to worry about trying to make this as tiny as possible. So that's what happens is the news item gets created like a standard model object, and then this listener says, hey, you just saved the news item, so I'm going to index that now. And that calls the news item index feature right here, which I walked through just a little bit ago. Takes the basic text, does cleanup, shoves it into the index.
So is news item also on that table?
Yes, there is a table called news item.
And just search also on?
There is, as a matter of fact, let's look at our models real quick. Be-
It's like a mirror that shows what is and what could be.
we have news source type. I don't even remember what the types were now, but news source is an individual feed. So CNN.com would be one.
It's an RSS.
And yeah, it's an RSS feed. And then they categorize them in certain ways. So as a result, you have different types. That's the news source, is CNN.com. That's the feed. And then the news item is an item that came in on that feed. News dupe are items we found that are possibly duplicate items. No, I didn't mean to open it. If you really want to see it, it's fine, but
Did the news item index method get something over to this? Is that what
yes, no, I'm sorry. That does not happen in news item. That is news source again. When the source first reads in the item, it sits there and it says, let me get my RSS feed, I'm going to read everything in, read my data from the RSS, and then it says, hey, do I already have this link? Because since every news article is linked, two different articles can't have the same link. Same link would always go to the same article. So that's the easiest check. It says, do I already have this link? Oh, I do? Well, forget it then. There's no point in me doing anything with this because I've already indexed it. If it doesn't, then it goes through and it says, well, so I didn't already link this. In the news dupes, do I have this link? So those are the first two checks. And it goes, oh, well, that link doesn't, I haven't already recorded that link. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to check and see, is this a duplicate article? I'm going to take the text, I'm going to clean it up, strip those things out. Is it a small score? Because you can't have too many matches. So in this case, I found 50. Seemed about right, and I simply said, this article is less than 50 words, we're going to boost the score. And that's just to help determine, is this a duplicate match?
So where do you come in on using Elasticsearch to like look for how does Elasticsearch do it?
Well, that's actually for the client when they say, I want to see all the articles for Goldman Sachs. That's not really at this stage right here. But that is simply,
So basically, that's just your Laravel app, you're typing it in, and then what, it just makes a call to.
it makes a call to Elasticsearch. And I'll go over that in just a second. But here, it goes through and it says, okay, I'm going to do some cleanup. If the search term is too long, it'll generate too many things. So I have to do what's called a Boolean search, which they call it a Boolean search, but it's really, I'm adding together results. So if my article is over 900 words, I'm going to, or 900 words after I drop the unimportant words, I'm sorry. I'm going to split that, and I can run checks on both chunks and then add together the scores. So that's what it's doing right here, where it says, let's see what how many words there are. We'll split that up. And then it just does a query. It puts together the query, and it says, hey, let me see if client builder.
Well, that's what you're playing here.
Yeah, client variable is,
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out where you're getting all this.
yeah, no, that's fine. So we get the score, we added things up, and what we actually found was that we would occasionally get results where we were getting some things saying, hey, I think this might be a match, because companies were using a lot of boilerplate in press releases. We had two guys who got promoted by, I think it was Goldman Sachs. And so 1 month, the press release came out saying, welcome John Doe to the position of fill in the blank. He is a graduate of fill in the blank, who previously worked for fill in the blank. His hobbies are whatever. And then 2 months later, we got welcome Michael Smith as fill in the blank of fill in the blank. He graduated from fill in the blank. So we got a hit saying, hey, I think this is a duplicate article. The score wasn't a super high one. It wasn't, ding, 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 yes, this is definite. But it was high enough that if we said, no, let's just filter out these, we don't want them at all, then we definitely had some going through that were duplicates. We could see that. So what I did was I put in a modification that said, hey, you got a score? What's the difference in time between the two articles being published? And then we're going to modify the score based on how far apart they are. So if I get two things that have low scores, they're kind of matching, but it turns out they were written 2 months apart, those are probably new articles with lots of boilerplate. If I got something that's got a ridiculously high score, even if they're written a year apart, nope, that's probably a duplicate. If I've got two things that have pretty close scores that were written within hours of each other, again, yeah, we wanted to flag that because that's probably a duplicate. Ultimately, a human has to go through and look at these. And part of the reason we realized on that was because no matter how much I refined this and got it so that, yes, we're getting all the duplicates, we're catching them all, we suddenly realized some of the duplicate articles that come in are better. So we don't want to throw them out and leave the old one in there. We want to give the administrator the ability to go, yeah, get rid of that old article and let's use the new one.
So your indexing algorithm is a part-time job?
Very part-time, because like 1 month we're generating a handful of possible hits.
If you were Google, you'd be a full-time job for thousands of people.
I'm not even sure it'd be thousands of people. And Google can afford it. But it's also just a safety precaution. I could tune that a little bit more and go, yeah, you know what? We'll just take whichever one has more words.
I say that satirically, but I also mean that search in this manner is something that is a constant matter of refinement.
Yes.
It's not a set it and forget it thing where search just works the way that people who don't understand search want it to.
Right. Because
I do search for my systems, and someone always said, well, we want this one to rank higher, and my answer is always, well, too fucking bad.
oh no, we can do that real easy. And that is, we're not exactly using search here in what we were doing there. I mean, it is a form of search for detecting duplicates. Let's go back down to this article search. Because right here, what you'll notice is we're searching for the phrase Goldman Sachs. We search for it twice. And there's a reason for that. Because one time we're searching in the headline, and another time we're searching in the body text. And even though these have the same boost right now, if it's in the headline, it's worth a lot more points than if it's in the body text, because the headline is shorter. Part of the way that a score is generated is how many matches did I have and how many extra
Instead of field ranking,
tokens are there. So
field value.
So right now, if the name's in the headline, it ranks better than if it's just in the body. And if it's in the headline and body, it tends to rank even higher. And I can adjust these scores. Right now, you can see this first article has a score of 1.35. If I were to bump that up to 5, the score just went up to 1.8. Same article, but what you're asking about is, yeah, we'd like this to rank a little higher. There you go. What? Yeah. Oh. Oh, you know what? You are correct, because I am using an older. Yes? Okay. I'm using an older thing. That should be search text. So I was way up. Sorry. I used to call that body text, and then I decided I didn't like that name because it was a little vague. And what was if that was body text, what was dupe text?
Well, okay, so let's jump to query strings. How do you execute query against
Queries in Elasticsearch are basically executed through passing it a JSON object. You can execute a query through a standard curl request, or even, I mean, if I sit here and I go,
And that's what you're doing here.
well, no, not a straight curl request. If I do that, I get my little thing. Yeah. I can go ahead and I can actually put in some stuff right up here with, telling it I'm going to do a query and I'm looking for this word, but you lose a ton of flexibility. Instead, you want to use I forgot the term they use, but it's their language, which it's basically, no, it's not SQL. Yeah.
So you're basically building a JSON object.
Building a JSON object, and I say, okay, so my search here is a Boolean search. It should match the phrase in the headline, it's this. Also in the text is this. I'm adjusting scores. The service provider.
Yes, Laravel search provider.
No, I just write in the news object traits. You had asked about traits earlier. I do, hey, I want to search for these words. I have a trait called a news column, so that if I'm looking at a person's entry, because the way this whole thing is set up, somebody might have a home page, and they might have a bunch of terms they want to search for. Or I might look at a page that is a company, and it's got terms I want to search for. So that's why I was using traits here, so that for a person, they use the trait, and for a company, they use the trait, or for an asset, it uses the trait.
So you added the trait to the model.
Yes, all of those models access the trait. And then when I say news column, and I say, give me your news items, hang on. Shoot. I was going to say, can't remember what we called those organization. Yeah. Oops, wait a minute. Oh, do organizations not have this turned on yet? I thought they did. No. Hang on. No. This is like an organization. Oh, yeah, looks like in the later code that may not be on right now. But normally that trait was there. And so when I say news items, I'd get a list of news items for that organization. And that worked just by coming in here, building a query up, and the query is basically the same thing that we saw earlier. You can see, I'm searching for the search text, the word, Goldman Sachs or whatever. Here's my boost. The words come from the news words of anything that has the news column trait. An organization generates its words list is different than the way a person or
That's not solid.
no, it's because the organization it was being generated off the name initially and the aliases, whereas for a person's portfolio, it's being generated off a list they've created. So as a result, yeah, the different ones have different ways of generating the words.
Whose items are contextual to the individual?
Contextual to the individual model.
So it's not the search string, that's something else.
It's not a search string, it's a group of search strings. So for instance, my user might have Goldman Sachs, Talent Investments, Gotham City, or whatever. And so each of those is a search string. And it would generate a query, one query with all of those.
It's also generating queries in multiple places, so on the dashboard.
Yeah.
Is where you see what the user comes up with, when you're looking at a specific organization or portfolio, it's going to be specific to that
So
organization.
you go to your funds, investments, and say, okay, all of this stuff is relevant to go to search.
That's what they can do on the dashboard.
So
When you're on a specific page for something, that's something that is set up on the dashboard.
So it would be something similar to this, but whereas I only have match phrase headline and match phrase search text once for Goldman Sachs, you would actually have that repeated multiple times for Goldman Sachs, Talend, Gotham City. It would be one search, and then it runs. And then, again, because we're doing Elasticsearch, we're playing some games, we went ahead and said it's got to be within the last 30 days. Publication date must be greater than or equal to now minus 30 days. And even more than that, we do a decay algorithm. We're using a Gaussian scale so that
So that's specific to your implementation is the search list. So your query is semi-automated.
it's actually more like completely automated. Behind the scenes, the users never put in
So this
anything.
is not a user
So
doing
those
search funds.
users are putting it on the dashboard, they will be putting
But
it.
it's appending,
Well-
it's adding it to a query.
So there's gonna be separate.
Yes, the users will be able to put in queries if they want, but
What we're seeing there is not.
it would actually be very similar to this, but this is designed so that much of the stuff is automated. If you go in and you look at Goldman Sachs, then it automatically generates a query based on Goldman Sachs. You don't type in Goldman Sachs again, because that would just get tedious every time you change to another company.
So where's it located in search?
And then we do this,
It's gonna come back with a list.
well, actually,
And actually, I mean, we haven't implemented this yet, but actually, at any time, the user can add whatever they want on a
Add another.
page. Add more search terms.
Oh, add
Okay.
search.
So even if they're looking at the Goldman Sachs page and saying, okay, how are they performing right now? They can put in other search terms they want on it.
right.
Okay, but this is gonna bring back a list of articles, you're gonna go get the IPs and display.
Yeah, it's just like it's doing here, where, if I roll this up so we don't see source, here's the first hit, here's the second one where the score already dropped a lot. It dropped because, as you can see in the headline, they didn't use Goldman Sachs. They used Goldman.
You gotta wrap it up if you've got.
Yep.
If you've got a last point you want to push across, no questions. I'm asking
Well, shoot. We covered these before, all the different analyzers there were. I think the question that you asked, based on you were asking about weighting and things like that, that's why you need to do this kind of stuff. Even though you're in Laravel, why you need to be using Elasticsearch plugged in, you can't go through Scout, for instance, because it's not giving you the flexibility. And it appears that it can't, because Scout's got to be more broad-based. So it would be very difficult to implement in Scout. Oh, well, I want to be able to put in a Gaussian decay based on a 2-week period, because,
It wouldn't be Scout at that point. You'd be writing Elasticsearch.
well, Scout would have to be able to know how to handle that to all of the other engines, and many of them probably can't even handle it. I'm not sure if Algolia
I
can.
would say none of them can, because the terminology is dependent on the implementation.
The terminology is, but the concept may not be.
Exactly. But the way Algolia is making its money is calling certain things facets instead of fourth dimensional argument
Yeah.
elements. So Algolia is a GUI for sentence
Right.
comparisons. This makes me feel lazy.
So there was the custom analyzers, which we talked about real briefly. I only used a smattering of them. It goes deep. I mean, you were asking about synonyms. What about things where they get mistyped? You can put in phonetic filters, so that what it really does is anytime it sees the letters PH, for instance, it replaces it with F.
It's actually surprisingly easy.
It is, but it's just all of the stuff
Yeah.
in there. I mean, there's the shingling, stop words. That was it. So I didn't quite get through everything. I apologize.
It's very close.
Does anybody? Yes.
And I think this a step further. What could you use this for detecting quality and the text you're searching through? So you said your command to go through. Okay, I want this to be ranked a little bit higher. Could you expand this to be looking at if the language is ranking a little bit, using more diverse words? Like, could
You can. You can. You're going to be building a fairly complicated search there, but you can, because you're generating a score. So what you can do is you can start doing things like saying, well, if I find these words in here, then I'm going to start bumping up the score, because these words sort of generally indicate a better written article. You can, as a matter of fact, yeah, you could do things to check diversity of words through filtering and aggregation, things like that. Elasticsearch actually is used in a surprisingly large number of places. I believe Wikipedia uses it for a lot of their article searching and things. Again, Elasticsearch, you have to remember, is technically built on top of Lucene, or however you pronounce it, which is as I understand it, a massively powerful engine. Part of the reason that Elasticsearch was built is Lucene has so much power that it is kind of like trying to ride a 600 horsepower motorcycle. And, you just, anything you try to do, it's going to tear your arms off. So the guy wrote the Java application of Elasticsearch to make it easier for people to interface with Lucene and get at that power. But, I mean, it's, a lot of it is there already. If you were missing something, if you really had some kind of feature, like you want to do a simple filter for word diversity. Yeah, they don't have a word diversity check right in here, but it's open source. So technically you can sit down and start writing that. You can probably do it, most of these you can probably do just through the custom filters like I did, where you don't have to take full advantage of the open source and dig in there. But for instance, geolocation is one of the abilities this has. So if I was putting in things, because we're dealing in articles, we don't have any geo coordinates. But if I was doing a dating app, which was the example I was using at San Diego PHP, then all of the individuals we have where they live, and we have the latitude and longitude for them. So when I do a search, I can say I want people near my latitude and longitude, and it helps filter that. That's great for 2 dimensions. You get into some concepts of things like multi-dimensional idea space, which is...
Did you know you can cube a word?
Oh, cube a word?
Yeah.
No, I did not.
That's multi-dimensional idea space.
Oh, okay.
You can take a word and cube it.
Thank you. For instance, if you had you can think of it as multidimensional as simply 2 dimensions are real easy. If I have Democrat and Republican for one axis, and I have poor and rich as another axis, they're unrelated. So an idea can fit anywhere in there. And it's got a score. It's saying, we're going to put it way over here on Republican and down here at poor. And that can help you locate in things. Well, that's 2 dimensions. We could add a 3rd dimension. I have no idea. I put myself in a box on that one because I wasn't...
No, it's literally time. Google's search algorithm, their big data algorithm, is able to key arrays on both time and change.
Yeah.
So when you generate it as a result set, which is your score, they generate it as a key that they tie to a date. They tie to
Well,
a page.
yeah, but actually what I'm talking about is something a little different. For instance, you could give a person a score based on multi-dimensions. One dimension is serious, silly. Another dimension is happy, sad. The 3rd dimension then becomes young, old. 4th dimension becomes income. Now you're going to hurt yourself if you try and visualize a 4-dimensional cube, but nonetheless, it's the same exact idea. You can set a person at any point in that multi-dimensional space.
So it's a correlate.
Yeah, and then say, hey, I want to filter people near this space. The geolocation won't do that because it's only doing 2 axes. But you could go in and probably without too much work, add a new filter to do multi-dimensional. Might be able to do it. You could do it. Well, I'm certain you could do it with custom filters as well, but that would probably be something where I would more seriously look at going into the open source. If I had to do that a lot, if I had to do a lot of multi-dimensional matching, I might go in through the open source to just try and add my own filters in there.
Well, I will say that search algorithms are the comp sci course before artificial intelligence. So when you do comp sci, you do search algorithms
Yeah.
and then artificial intelligence, but they are nearest neighbors.
They're pretty close, yeah.
So it
There's a lot of overlap at least.
does get crazy.
Yeah. So, any other questions? I'm sorry that this went on so long.
I just
Because I heard you had a really great presentation. Oh, and you know what? She can do it next month. Fill in that blank spot.
Huge
I'm
thank you to
teasing her. Sure.
And I think we still have a few minutes on the rent agreement.
Only if
We just went through what definitely needs.
Well, quite a few people, like I said, quite a few people use it out in the wild. I don't know of any particular applications around right now, other than what we're doing.
We had a product at work that just did what we're using just to go through logs.
Oh, as a matter of fact, it figures very heavily into elk stack. The E in elk stack is elastic, and the K is Kibana. Forget what the L stands for. Kibana. This other tool. For what? Yeah. I could definitely see you using it for that.
Yeah,
Or for being good for that, I mean.